Hey everyone, so in the last video we created our first class-based component and we made a really simple component. We basically copied a functional component that we created in the past and we transformed it. We basically went on to the React documentation and we copied one of the examples and we just changed it up a little bit. We changed the name and we deleted some stuff from it, and then we displayed it within our React application. So just for you to go and see that and see what it looks like, our current React application looks like this here. Okay, so this is the React boilerplate code that we got previously. This is a little component that we added down the bottom, and we have two components up here. So the first component is my component with button, and it has this little button here. And the second component is this hello, and this hello here is actually our class-based component that we're going to work with today. So at the moment our class-based component here just says hello. It doesn't really do much. It's not even really useful as a class-based component. We could have just displayed hello in a functional component, but with class-based components we have a little bit more flexibility over function-based components. So we can add a special thing called state, and state will allow us to go and hold data, so information that we get maybe from a database or an API, and we can then display that information in our browser using JSX or whatever's inside our return here. This is what we call JSX. So what I want to do first is I want to go and create our constructor. So one thing I want to mention is if you have any trouble following along with this tutorial or any other React tutorials, one thing that you can do is just jump onto Google and Google React Docs or React documentation, and one of the first links will be reactjs.org. This is the official documentation for React. So on the home page here, you can read a little bit about React and get to know some of the basics of it. But the main feature I use this for is if there's something that I'm trying to search or learn about, I go up to the search bar here and I just type whatever I want to go and learn more about. So I just said to you there that we're going to be using a class-based component and that we're going to use a constructor. So maybe you want to type in constructor. So just type in constructor and hit enter. So the first thing you see here is the constructor keyword. You can read a little bit about it, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down here a bit until we can get an example where a constructor is used within a class-based component. And look, we found something here. So we can see there's this class-based component. It's called scrolling list and it extends react.component. So that's exactly what we have, only we have a different name for our class. And then we need a constructor. So we're going to use this constructor. So I'm going to just copy this and I'm going to bring it back to my component. And it's important to understand that this constructor will be placed just inside our class component, so inside here, but make sure that it's not inside this render or inside the return, because it doesn't belong there. So if you put it there, you will get a compiler error. Now, it's not a perfect way to learn React by copying documentation and then pasting it in, because a lot of the time if you just paste it directly in and you don't know what you're looking at, it won't actually compile. So for example, looking at this, we've got this constructor method, but we've got these props in here. So props are just things that a parent component can pass into a child. We don't need this, so we can just delete it out of it. We've got this super thing. Just know for now that we want to include this super with our round brackets. Again, we've deleted props out of there because it's not needed. This thing here, this is not needed. We can go and bind functions in class-based components, which we'll touch on maybe in a later video, but for now don't worry about it. So far what we've done is we've learned about this idea of a thing called a constructor, and before that I was talking about state. So we're going to have to put some state in here as well. The state is actually defined within our constructor. So again, if you want to go back to the documentation, you could go and read a little bit about it or whatever. I'm just telling you this is how you could go about it if you're on your own and you're trying to figure things out. Go to the documentation, read a little bit about it, and then it gets to a stage where you kind of know how it all works, but you forget the syntax, so you don't know what it looks like. So you'll go to the React documentation, you'll see an example, and you'll be like, oh yeah, that's how it works. And then you'll see that there's some extra little bits, like for example, this .list ref. We're like, okay, no, we don't want that. We delete that out of it. But then you might be like, oh, how do I use state? So you could go up here and you'd type in maybe state, and you'd go and read down through it until you find an example of where state is used in a constructor. But for now, this is just something that you can do, and it's just a little tip to try and help you in the future. So for example, if we scroll down here, you'll see this .set state, and you have something like this. So you could go and copy this and bring it back into your application, and then you can put this in after super. So after super, you can put in a little semicolon. Now for our state, it depends what we want to hold in our state. You can hold whatever you want. You can hold a list of numbers, you can hold a list of names, you can hold whatever you want. But for this example, we're just going to hold something called a counter, and a counter is just going to be like a normal counter. It's going to hold whatever number, and it's going to increment it, right? Or we could add that piece of functionality in with a button to increment our counter. So initially we would want to set our counter to 0. So inside our curly brackets, we have whatever we want to go and set. So this is called count. I don't really want to call it count, I want to call it counter. So I'm going to rename it to counter, and I don't want to have it set to this state.count plus 1. I don't want that. I want to just set it to 0. So in this example, our counter is going to be set to 0. So if I want to go and print out counter, it's going to be 0. So let's go and try that. So inside our render here, we've got a h1. So let's add another h1, and within our h1, we'll just display out the counter's property or value. Now, one thing to keep in mind here is this return, without any brackets or anything. This is cool once we have one JSX element, which is a h1 in this case. But if we want to add in multiple, we need to put in a round bracket. So we need to surround this with a round bracket. And since we're now going to be returning two JSX elements, we need to actually wrap this all in a div or something that will contain both our headers. So let's just go and wrap it in a div, because it's probably one of the easier things that we can wrap it in. So we'll just div. We don't even have to add a class name or anything to our div. We'll just call it div, and we'll copy this, bring this down to the next line, clean it up a little bit, and close our div here. Just bring this in. Okay, so that looks a little bit better. So we're just going to copy this h1, and we're going to paste it. This is actually not part of the JSX. This round bracket colon, that should be after this div here, because that's the closing round bracket for this. So close that off like so. And we don't want to print out another hello. We could do that, but we want to go and print out the counter's value. We can delete this hello text, and we can add in the counter is. So we'll say the counter is, and now we want to use some curly brackets, and I'm just going to straighten up that. And within our curly brackets, we're going to want to reference our state. So we're going to say this dot state, because that's what we're accessing, and then within our state we want to access our counter. So we'll say this dot state dot counter, and there's just one other little thing that we need to do here. We can actually go and get rid of this set state, and we can just say this dot state, and we can make this a small s, and we can get rid of that round bracket, and we can get rid of this round bracket, and we can bring that on to the next line just to clean it up a little bit. and we can set this equal. Okay, so now we've got our state, we've got our counter, it's equal to 0, and we want to go and print it out here. So if we now go and hit save, we've got an extra curly bracket, have we? Okay, we've actually deleted that closing round bracket in the process, so we'll add that back in. So now if we go and try and save this, it should compile, and so it does. So if we go back to our browser, we can see the counter is 0, so that's what we were expecting to see because we've set the counter state to 0, and we've got this extra little thing here. So if we go back in here, we can see this here was left in. We don't actually want that. So if we go back to this now, that's gone, and it still says the counter is 0. So this is good. So in this video, we've learned a little bit more about class-based components. We've learned that we can use a thing called state, and we can hold data in this state. For example, we set a counter here, and we set this counter to 0, but we could set this counter to something like 5. And if we go and save this again, then it would say this counter is 5. And we can have more than just one variable. We could have something else, and we could call it maybe score. And we could say score is equal to 10, right? So, and instead of printing out counter here, we might want to print out score. So if we go and put score in there and we hit save, and we go back, now you can see the counter is 10. The counter isn't actually 10, but what we've done here is we're saying the counter is, and then we've put 10 in there. We should really change that to the score is, and then it would represent the proper score. And we could do things like maybe if we wanted to print out this.state.score, and we wanted to take away this.state.counter from the score. So if we go and save this and we go back, we can see the counter is 5. Now, I don't know why you'd want to take away the counter from the score, but you can sort of get an idea of the power of the things that you can do when you have this state and you're holding multiple variables inside a state, and you can also change it. So for example, one thing might be if you had a button, you could go and create a button, and every time you go and hit that button, you might want to increment the counter. So you have a button, you hit the button, then it increments the counter from 5 to 6 to 7 to 8 to 9, and then in your React application it gets updated. So an example of this could be maybe a shopping cart or something like that. Maybe you've ordered an item, and when you've ordered an item, let's say it could be a new phone or a laptop or whatever, then you might have a little button beside that letting you increment the amount of phones or laptops you want to buy, or allow you to decrease the amount of laptops or phones that you're going to buy. That's just an example, but you can come up with your own creative ideas on how you can use state to get your applications to perform whatever you want them. So in the next video, we're going to do just that. We're going to go and we're going to use the Material UI React framework, and we're going to go and place a button in our class component here, and we're going to get that button to update the state, and then it will eventually update the UI that we all see. But I hope from watching this video that you've got a better understanding of state and how it works in class-based components in React. If you liked the video, give it a like. If you want to see more videos like this, hit that subscribe button. Have a good day.